Han checked his reflection in the viewport of the shuttle approaching Proxima Centauri. His dark hair was disheveled, and his exobotanist uniform looked worn after 3 straight days in the research lab. He hadn't expected the urgent summons from someone like Tahoe, one of the wealthiest Quilaxian merchants in the galaxy. Final approach to Vela State. The shuttle's AI announced, "Please prepare for docking procedures." Outside, the massive private habitat gleamed. Its curved architecture seemed impossible by human standards, all sweeping lines and surfaces that changed color with the light. Han had only seen such structures in educational videos about the Quilaxian elite. Why would a dying alien billionaire want to see me? Han muttered to himself as the shuttle slid into a docking bay larger than his entire research station. 2 Quilaxian attendants met him at the airlock. Their blue-scaled skin shimmered under the lights, and they wore formal garments that marked their high status. "Human Han, welcome to Vela State," said the taller one with a deep bow. "I am Quan, Chief of Staff. Master Tahoe awaits you in the main chamber." Han followed them through corridors decorated with art from a dozen worlds. The wealth on display in just one hallway could fund his botanical research for decades. They passed other Quilaxians who stopped and stared at the human visitor with obvious surprise. "Master Tahoe rarely receives guests these days," Quan explained. "Your presence has caused quite a stir." The main chamber took Han's breath away. A vast room with a transparent ceiling showing the stars above, and walls lined with living plants from across the galaxy. Some specimens Han had only read about in research papers. In the center, on a floating platform, lay Tahoe. Even to Han's untrained eye, the Quilaxian looked unwell. His scales had lost their luster, appearing pale and almost translucent. Medical equipment surrounded him, quietly monitoring his condition. "You've arrived," Tahoe said, his voice surprisingly strong despite his appearance. "Come closer, human Han. My eyes aren't what they used to be." Han approached cautiously. "Sir, I'm honored by your invitation, but I don't understand why I'm here." Tahoe made a sound that might have been a laugh. 7 years ago, research expedition to the Baltine system. Do you remember?" Han fought back. "Yes, I was collecting plant samples from the outer moons. There was a Quilaxian team there too, studying the mineral formations." "There was an accident," Tahoe continued. "A pressure failure in an environmental suit. The memory clicked into place. Someone's oxygen system malfunctioned. I shared my backup tank until the rescue shuttle arrived." "That someone was me," Tahoe said. "You never saw my face because of the emergency helmet protocols. You saved my life without knowing who I was, and then refused the reward my staff tried to give you." Han shrugged. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Tahoe said firmly. "They would not. That is precisely why I've brought you here today." Before Han could respond, the chamber doors opened again. 3 female Quilaxians entered, each dressed in elaborate ceremonial attire that seemed to shimmer with embedded technology. They moved with grace and purpose, taking positions around Tahoe's platform. "These are my most trusted advisors," Tahoe explained. "Jia, my financial director. Yun, my technology specialist. And Minna, my diplomatic officer." Each bowed slightly as they were introduced. Han noticed they wore distinctive scale decorations that marked their high education and status. "I am dying, Han," Tahoe said bluntly. "A genetic condition with no cure. I have perhaps 2 standard weeks remaining." "I'm sorry," Han said, unsure what else to offer. "I have no children, no family to inherit my holdings," Tahoe continued. "My business rivals have been circling like scavengers, waiting for me to name an heir from among their ranks." A Quilaxian in medical attire approached, checking the equipment around Tahoe before administering a medication through a tube connected to his arm. When they left, Tahoe seemed to gain strength. "I've made my decision and filed it with the Interspecies Commerce Authority yesterday. You, Han, will inherit everything." Han nearly fell over. "What? That's impossible. I'm human. I know nothing about your business or culture." Which is precisely why you are perfect, Tahoe replied. You will see things with fresh eyes, and you will have help. He gestured to the three advisors. Jia, Yun, and Minna have served me loyally for many cycles. They will guide you, teach you our ways, and help you manage your new responsibilities. One of the advisors, Jia, stepped forward with a small device. The inheritance requires a biological marker transfer, if you consent. Han's head was spinning. This is crazy. You're giving me your entire fortune. And what? Your staff too. In your human terms, they would traditionally be called concubines, Tahoe said, though that translation loses much meaning. They are advisors, companions, and in our culture, extensions of the family unit. They have agreed to remain and serve the new master of Vel Estate. Before Han could process this information, a series of chimes sounded throughout the chamber. Quan rushed in, looking alarmed. Master, we've received formal protests from the 7 houses. They're challenging the inheritance on grounds of species incompatibility. Tahoe's eyes narrowed. As expected, proceed with the transfer immediately. Jia approached Han with the device. Your hand, please. This will confirm your acceptance and record your biological signature. Han hesitated, then extended his hand. The device scanned it, projecting a holographic display of contracts and certificates in both human and Quilaxian languages. Do you accept the inheritance, with all its responsibilities and privileges? Tahoe asked formally. Han looked around. At the dying alien who had chosen him, at the 3 advisors watching him intently, and at the stars visible through the transparent ceiling. I accept, he said, not entirely sure what he was getting into. Then it is done, Tahoe said as the device chimed its confirmation. From this moment, you are the master of Vel Estate and head of the Vel Trading Consortium. Han's communication device immediately began buzzing with incoming messages from unknown Quilaxian contacts. The life he had known was over, and something entirely new and unexpected had begun. Han stood at the panoramic window of what was now his office, staring at the distant stars. 3 days had passed since Tahoe's death, and the galaxy seemed determined to reject his inheritance. His communication device hadn't stopped chiming with messages from angry Quilaxian business leaders. You need to respond to the Mercantile Guild, Jia said as she entered the room. Her blue scales caught the light as she moved, highlighting the gold educational markings along her forearms. They're threatening to freeze all Vel trading permits. Han sighed. I've read their message 6 times and still don't understand half the terminology. Which is why I've prepared a response draft for you, Jia said, sending a file to his device. It cites 14 precedents of cross-species inheritance under galactic commerce law. Han scanned the document. It was brilliant, respectful but firm, and filled with references to obscure trade agreements that even the Guild would need to research. This is perfect, he said. Thank you. Jia tilted her head slightly. It is my function to assist in financial and legal matters. Your function, Han repeated. About that, I still don't understand what exactly your role is, or Yun's and Minna's. Tahoe called you concubines, but that term in human culture doesn't really fit what you do. Jia's scales rippled in what Han had come to recognize as the Quilaxian equivalent of a thoughtful expression. A translation problem, she said finally. In our culture, the position combines advisor, representative, and companion. We are highly educated specialists who align our careers with a patron. I hold advanced degrees in interstellar economics and Quilaxian law. So you're not. Han hesitated, not wanting to offend. Not pleasure servants. Jia finished for him, her scales flashing with amusement. No, though physical companionship can be part of such arrangements between compatible species, our primary value is our knowledge and loyalty. Han felt his face redden. I see. And you're okay with staying here, working for a human. We made our choice when we agreed to Tahoe's succession plan, Jia said. The challenge will be interesting. The door slid open again, and Yun entered carrying several holographic projectors. The tech specialist's scales had a greener tint than Jia's, and she wore several mechanical enhancements around her wrists and neck. "I've completed the security review," Yun announced, setting up the projectors. 17 unauthorized access attempts in the past day alone. She activated the devices, and three-dimensional models of the estate's systems appeared in the air. "Corporate espionage?" Han asked. "More likely preparing for a takeover," Yun replied. "The 7 houses don't believe you'll last a month. They're looking for weaknesses." Han frowned. "Great. More good news." "Actually, this is good news," Minna said, entering with a tray of food. The diplomatic specialist's scales had elegant silver patterns that marked her high status in interspecies relations. They still think they can win through conventional means. They haven't resorted to assassination yet. "That's reassuring," Han said, taking the offered plate. The food looked like blue crystals, but smelled oddly like cinnamon. "Quilaxian protein structures," Minna explained, noticing his hesitation. "I've had the kitchen adapt them for human digestion. You should try to accommodate some of our customs if you're going to lead a Quilaxian house." Han took a cautious bite. It wasn't unpleasant, like seafood with a sweet aftertaste. "You've also received 14 marriage proposals since yesterday," Minna continued casually. Han choked on his food. "What?" "Standard practice," Jia explained. "The other houses want to establish connections to your new power. A marriage alliance would give them influence." "I'm not marrying anyone," Han said firmly. "Of course not," Minna agreed. "Accepting any one house would make enemies of the others. I've prepared diplomatic rejections, citing your need to adjust to Quilaxian society before considering such commitments." Han shook his head in amazement. "You've thought of everything." "It's what we were trained for," Yun said, "though adapting our strategies for a human leader presents unique challenges." "Like what?" Han asked. The 3 advisors exchanged glances before Yun spoke. "You make decisions differently. Quilaxians follow established patterns. You seem to jump between ideas without clear connections." "Humans call it intuition," Han explained. "We see patterns too, just not always in a straight line." "Fascinating," Minna said. "This could be advantageous in negotiations. Quilaxian tactics are predictable to other Quilaxians." Their conversation was interrupted by an alarm from N's devices. "We have visitors," she announced. "A delegation from the Commerce Authority. They're requesting immediate entry." "Are we ready for this?" Han asked, suddenly anxious. "Definitely not," Jia said honestly. "But refusing would show weakness." Han straightened his clothes, still his own rather than the formal Quilaxian attire that had been prepared for him. "Then let's meet them as we are. No pretending I'm something I'm not." His 3 advisors looked surprised but quickly adapted. "A bold strategy," Minna said with approval. "Authenticity can be powerful." As they walked toward the reception hall, Han noticed how the 3 moved in perfect coordination around him. Jia slightly ahead preparing financial details, Yun scanning for technical threats, and Minna at his side ready to guide the diplomatic exchange. The massive doors to the reception hall opened, revealing 5 stern-looking Quilaxian officials in formal regalia. "Human Han," the leader said, not bothering to hide the distaste in his voice. "The Commerce Authority requires explanation for this irregular succession." Han felt a moment of panic, but then felt Minna's subtle touch on his arm, a signal they had developed to indicate she had information to share. "The Commerce Authority is welcome to Vel Estate," Han said, buying time. As the officials entered, Han noticed something odd. They were all wearing the same distinctive emblem, one that didn't match the official Commerce Authority symbols he'd been studying. He caught Jia's eye and saw her scales flash a warning pattern. These weren't government officials at all, but representatives of a single house disguised as authorities. "Actually," Han said, finding confidence in the deception, "before we begin, I'd like to understand why the Commerce Authority is represented exclusively by House Gam interests today." The delegation froze, clearly shocked by his recognition of their true affiliation. Perhaps, Han continued, this conversation should include representatives from all houses, not just yours. As the would-be officials stammered excuses, Han realized the complex game he was now part of, and that with his 3 advisors, he might actually have a chance at winning it. Han leaned closer to the holographic display floating above Tahoe's private desk. After 2 weeks of leading the Vel Trading Consortium, he had finally gained access to the most secured files. What he found disturbed him deeply. These medical reports don't match the public records, Han said, pointing to the divergent data streams. According to these private scans, Tahoe's condition appeared suddenly, not gradually as everyone believed. Yun stood beside him, her green-tinted scales reflecting the blue glow of the hologram. The timeline is suspicious. The disease manifested 2 days after his meeting with the 7 Houses Mining Consortium. Han had been working late into the night with his advisors, trying to understand why Tahoe had chosen him as heir. The answer, it seemed, lay hidden in these encrypted files. Can you access the environmental data from his ship during that period? Han asked. Yun's fingers moved rapidly over the control panel, already working on it. His personal vessel recorded everything: air composition, radiation levels, even food consumption. Jia entered the room carrying data tablets. I've analyzed the financial transactions as you requested. There were unusual movements of funds between House Gam and several research facilities specializing in genetic modification. Han felt the pieces starting to connect. The same House Gam that tried to infiltrate our estate with fake officials last week. The very same, Jia confirmed. They've been Tahoe's main rival for decades. Mena joined them, her diplomatic training evident in her controlled expression despite the tension in the room. I've been speaking with my contacts in the Interspecies Council. Rumors suggest House Gam recently gained access to restricted biological research from the human Quilaxian War era. Han looked up sharply. Biological weapons research. Supposedly for historical documentation only, Minna said. But if they found something they could modify to target specific Quilaxian genetic markers, like Tahoe's, Han finished, they could have assassinated him without anyone suspecting murder. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Han studied the 3 Quilaxians who had become his closest allies in this strange new world. Their expressions were difficult for him to read completely, but he could sense their concern and their anger. Why would Tahoe suspect this but not act? Han wondered aloud. Quilaxian culture, Jia explained. Direct accusation without absolute proof would destroy his house's reputation. Better to die with honor than life disgraced. But he didn't just accept it, Yun said, pointing to another file she had uncovered. Look at these research grants he funded in his final months, all focused on genetic repair technologies. Han scrolled through the data. He was looking for a cure, but ran out of time. And then he chose you, Minna said quietly, a human scientist with no stake in Quilaxian power struggles. Han paced the room, thinking. He must have believed I could see things differently, find solutions where Quilaxian traditions created blind spots. Their discussion was interrupted by a soft alarm from Yun's security systems. We have an intrusion in the Eastern Laboratory wing, she announced, bringing up surveillance feeds. The screens showed 3 figures in stealth suits moving through the darkened lab area, clearly trying to avoid detection. Security team response time is 4 minutes, Yun said, already activating the estate's defenses. Too long, Han decided. They'll get whatever they came for and be gone. We need to see what they're after. It's too dangerous, Minna objected. If House Gam is behind this, all the more reason to know what they want, Han insisted. Yun, can you lock down sections of the lab to control their movement? Guide them away from the exit. Yun nodded, her scales flashing with excitement as her fingers danced across the controls. Redirecting them now. They'll think they're heading toward the biological sample storage, but I'm leading them to the empty testing chamber. Jia, Contact our security team, but tell them to secure the perimeter only. No entry until my signal, Han continued. Minna, I need you to prepare a formal communication to the actual Commerce Authority. If we catch these intruders, we'll need official witnesses. As his advisors carried out his instructions, Han watched the intruders on the screen. They moved with professional precision, but seemed increasingly confused by the changing access patterns Yun had created. They're in the testing chamber, Yun announced. I've sealed all exits. Can you get audio? Han asked. Yun adjusted the settings, and suddenly they could hear the intruders' voices. Wrong way. The genetic samples should be here, one was saying. The blueprint was clear. This is section C7, another argued. Doesn't matter now, the third said. We need to abort. Get the emergency transmitter and... Han felt a chill. They're after Tahoe's DNA samples. Proof of how he died would be in his genetic material, which would be useless unless they believed it showed evidence of deliberate manipulation. Jia concluded. Exactly, Han said. We need to capture at least one of them alive. The security team arrived at the perimeter, awaiting instructions. Han studied the layout of the testing chamber, noting the multiple entry points. Yun, can you vent aerosolized tranquilizer through the environmental systems? He asked. Human safe or Quilaxian safe? She asked. Quilaxian. If they're from HFY, they won't be human, Han reasoned. Yun initiated the sequence. On screen, they watched as a fine mist filled the chamber. The intruders noticed too late, scrambling for their breathing equipment before collapsing one by one. Security team in now, Han ordered. Full biohazard protocols to maintain the chain of evidence. As the team secured the unconscious intruders, Han turned to his advisors. We need to move quickly. Once HFY realizes their team has been captured, they'll take more drastic measures. Mina's communication device chimed. The Commerce Authority has responded. They're sending an investigative team. But they won't arrive for at least 12 hours. We don't have 12 hours, Han said grimly. Yun, how quickly can you prepare the private shuttle for launch? 20 minutes, she replied. Where are we going? To the one place HFY won't expect, Han said. The human research station where I used to work. We need to analyze Tahoe's DNA ourselves, away from Quilaxian interference. Jia looked concerned. That would mean leaving the estate vulnerable. They already infiltrated our security once, Han pointed out. We're not safe here. The three advisors exchanged glances, their scales shifting through colors in silent communication. We'll need to take key data cores, Yun said finally. And emergency funds, Jia added. I'll prepare diplomatic credentials that will get us through human security, Minna offered. Han felt a sudden rush of gratitude toward these three beings from a completely different world who had come to trust his very human instincts. Pack only what you can carry, he instructed. We leave in 20 minutes. As they hurried to prepare, the estate's systems detected multiple approaching vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel near the habitat's coordinates. Han nodded, focusing on the sample under analysis. For 2 weeks, they had been working around the clock, studying the pathogen that killed Tahoe while staying one step ahead of HFY's agents. Jia entered the room, returning from her communication session in the colony's transmission booth. I've moved another portion of VEL assets through the shell companies. We now have funding secured for at least 3 months, regardless of what happens with the estate. Good, Han said, not looking up from his work, because I think I've found something important. The three Quilaxians gathered around the display. On the screen, they could see the pathogen's structure, an elegant but deadly piece of biological engineering. See this protein sequence here? Han pointed to a section of the molecule. It's designed to bind specifically to Tahoe's genetic markers, but the binding mechanism is inefficient, almost as if. As if what? Yun asked. As if whoever designed it didn't fully understand how to create perfect biological keys, Han explained. They forced it to work through brute computational power rather than elegant design. Un studied the display. Quilaxian biological science approaches problems sequentially. Each step must be perfected before moving to the next. But human researchers often work on multiple aspects simultaneously, Han said, thinking aloud. We accept imperfect solutions that can be improved through iteration. He began typing rapidly, inputting a series of commands that seemed random to his companions. What are you doing? Jia asked. Testing a theory, Han replied. If I'm right, we can not only prove this pathogen was engineered to kill Taio, but we might be able to develop a treatment. For the next several hours, Han worked with intense focus, occasionally asking Un to help with calculations or equipment adjustments. His approach seemed chaotic to the Quilaxians, jumping between different aspects of the problem without completing any single part first. This isn't how we would solve this, Min observed, watching Han work. I know, Han said, smiling slightly. That's exactly what Taio was counting on when he chose me. He needed someone who thinks differently. By midnight, exhaustion showed on all their faces, but Han's eyes were bright with excitement. I think I've got it, he announced, holding up a simulation display. The pathogen has 3 main attack vectors on Quilaxian cells. Traditional Quilaxian medicine would address each vector separately, but if we target all 3 simultaneously with this compound. The simulation showed the pathogen molecules breaking apart under the influence of Han's treatment. Is that possible? Jia asked. Our medical protocols require sequential treatment validation. That's exactly why your scientists haven't found a cure, Han explained. Sometimes you need to break the rules to find new solutions. Yuan studied the formula Han had developed. The synthesis would require equipment we don't have here. Then we need to get to somewhere that does, Han decided. How soon can we safely leave the colony? Their planning was interrupted by a loud alarm blaring through the colony's communication system. Attention all residents, announced a voice over the speakers. Unscheduled ship approaching. Security protocols activated. All residents returned to quarters immediately. Minna moved to the small window. 2 ships, not colony transports. House Gam? Jia asked, already gathering their most important data cores. Most likely, Minna confirmed. They must have traced our last transmission. Han quickly transferred his research to a secure portable drive. We need a way off this moon that doesn't involve the main docking bay. Yun smiled, her scales shifting to a pattern Han now recognized as excitement. When I was exploring the colony systems, I found something interesting. The original mining team kept a small emergency shuttle in a maintenance bay on the far side. It's old, but functional. How far? Han asked. The conspiracy was closing in, and their time was running out. The mining colony on Proxima Centauri's 4th moon wasn't designed for comfort. Its bare metal walls and constant mechanical hum reminded Han of his days as a junior researcher, before his life had changed so dramatically. Now, the small living quarters served as both hiding place and laboratory for Han and his 3 Quilaxian companions. Hand me that molecular separator, Han said, reaching toward the makeshift workbench they had assembled from mining equipment. Yun passed him the device, her scaled fingers moving with precision. The colony supervisor is getting suspicious. He asked again why we needed these supplies. What did you tell him? Han asked, carefully extracting a sample of Tahoe's tissue they had managed to bring from the estate. That we're independent researchers documenting mineral composition, Minna replied from her position by the door where she monitored the corridor. He seemed to accept it, though I noticed security patrols have increased. 1/2 kilometer through maintenance tunnels, Yun replied. Han looked at his 3 companions, once strangers from an alien culture, now his closest allies. Then we better start moving. They gathered only the most essential equipment and data. Then Yun led them to a service panel hidden behind storage containers. The tunnels beyond were narrow and dimly lit, designed for maintenance drones rather than people. As they moved through the cramped passages, Han heard colony security announcing that visitors were searching for fugitives from Quilaxian justice. They're using official channels now, Minna whispered, claiming we stole Tahoe's property. Technically true, Jia pointed out. We did take his DNA samples. To solve his murder, Han said firmly. They reached a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. Bun consulted her improvised map. Left passage, she directed. As they turned the corner, they heard voices echoing from behind. Colony security have found their quarters and discovered the hidden tunnel entrance. They're gaining on us, Han said, trying to move faster in the confined space. Wait, Yun said suddenly, stopping at a control panel. I can reconfigure the maintenance schedule. Create a distraction. Her fingers moved across the panel with practiced skill. Moments later, alarms blared throughout the tunnel system as cleaning drones activated in sections behind them, blocking their pursuers. Brilliant, Han said appreciatively. I adapted a human hacking technique. Yun admitted. Sequential code breaking would have taken too long. They reached the hidden bay 10 minutes later. The shuttle was indeed old, a model at least 20 years outdated, but appeared intact. Can you fly it? Han asked as they climbed aboard. I studied the specifications, Yun said, taking the pilot's seat. The principles are similar to Quilaxian vessels, just less elegant. As they prepared for launch, Han looked at his 3 companions, Jia reviewing their financial resources on a portable terminal, Minna establishing a false flight plan to misdirect pursuers, and Yun confidently activating the ship's ancient systems. We've all changed, Han observed. You're thinking more like humans now. And you're approaching problems with Quilaxian thoroughness, Jia replied with an approximation of a human smile. Perhaps that's the real advantage, not human or Quilaxian thinking alone, but the combination of both. The shuttle's engines rumbled to life as colony security reached the outer door of the maintenance bay. Where to now? Yun asked, her hands poised over the controls. Han thought for a moment. The Interstellar Commerce Summit begins in 3 days on Centauri Station. Every major house and human trade delegation will be there. The perfect place to reveal what we've discovered, Minna agreed. And to announce our cure, Han added, patting the secure case containing his research. The shuttle lifted off, shooting through the bay doors just as security broke through. As they accelerated away from the mining colony, Han knew they were racing towards something much bigger than justice for Tahoe. They were carrying the seeds of a new way for humans and Quilaxians to work together, one that could change both their societies forever. The great hall of the Interstellar Commerce Summit fell silent as Han walked onto the stage. Behind him came Jia, Yun, and Minna, no longer walking in the traditional formation of Quilaxian advisors, but standing beside him as equals. The journey that had begun with an unexpected inheritance had transformed them all. Distinguished representatives, Han began, his voice steady despite the thousands of eyes watching from across the galaxy. 3 months ago, I inherited the Vel Trading Consortium from Tahoe, who chose me, a human, as his successor. Today, I present evidence that will change how our species work together forever. The massive display behind him activated, showing the genetic analysis they had completed at Han's old research station. The data was clear even to non-scientists, a deliberately engineered pathogen that targeted specific markers in Tahoe's DNA. Tahoe was murdered, Han continued, not by a rival house acting alone, but by a conspiracy involving leaders from 3 houses who believed Quilaxian wealth should remain in Quilaxian control. Murmurs spread through the audience. Security officers moved closer to the representatives from House Gam, House Locke, and House Rio as their names appeared on the screen. But this crime led to something unexpected, Han said, his voice warming. Working together, human and Quilaxian, we developed this. He held up a small crystal vial containing a shimmering blue liquid. A cure, he announced, not just for the engineered pathogen that killed Tahoe, but for 7 genetic conditions previously thought untreatable in Quilaxian physiology. The hall erupted in shocked conversations. Yun stepped forward, her technical expertise evident as she explained the treatment's mechanism. Human scientific methods approach problems differently than ours, she said. Where we seek perfection through sequential improvements, humans try simultaneous approaches that sometimes create unexpected solutions. Gia followed with the economic implications. The Vel Trading Consortium is not claiming exclusive rights to this treatment. Instead, we propose a new type of interspecies medical cooperative. The representatives from the affected houses attempted to leave but found their paths blocked by Commerce Authority security. The evidence against them was too strong to ignore. As the presentation concluded, the Commerce Authority's High Minister approached the stage. The ancient Quilaxian scales were faded with age, but his eyes were sharp as he examined Han and his three partners. "In my 200 years of service," the minister said, his voice carrying across the now quiet hall, "I have never witnessed such a challenge to our traditional ways, nor have I seen such promising results from interspecies collaboration." He turned to address the assembled representatives. "The accused will face trial according to our laws, and the Vel Trading Consortium's new structure will be recognized as legitimate under Interstellar Commerce Code." The formal recognition was all they had hoped for, but the minister wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, "I propose that this model of human Quilaxian partnership be studied for potential implementation across other ventures." As the summit concluded, Han found himself surrounded by representatives from dozens of worlds, all eager to discuss possibilities for collaboration. Through it all, Jia, Yun, and Minna remained at his side, no longer bound by the traditional roles that had once defined them. Later, in the privacy of their shuttle returning to what they now simply called home rather than the estate, Han reflected on how much had changed. "Did you ever imagine this outcome when Tahoe named me his heir?" he asked. Mina smiled, a facial expression she had adopted from humans. Tahoe was brilliant, but even he couldn't have predicted this. "We're going to face resistance," Jia warned, ever practical. "Changing thousand-year-old traditions won't happen overnight. Some already call it the human contamination of Quilaxian culture," Yun added, checking the latest news feeds. Han nodded, understanding the challenges ahead. "And others? Others call it the beginning of a new age," Minna said. "The commentators are using the term Tahoe's vision to describe what we've started." Through the viewport, they could see the first ships bearing their new insignia, a design that combined elements of both human and Quilaxian symbolism. The vessels were headed to distant systems, carrying not just trade goods, but the story of their unprecedented partnership. "We should establish an educational foundation," Han suggested. "Bring young humans and Quilaxians together to study each other's approaches." "Already working on the financial structure," Jia said, bringing up projections on her tablet. "I've identified 7 research stations that could be converted to joint facilities," Yun added. "And I drafted proposals for diplomatic recognition of the new status category we've created," Minna completed. Han smiled at how seamlessly they now worked together, no longer following the rigid Quilaxian hierarchy or the sometimes chaotic human methods, but something entirely new that combined the strengths of both. A message arrived from Earth's Interstellar Relations Department, formally recognizing Han's new position and requesting increased trade access to Quilaxian markets. Similar messages had been arriving from across human space. "They all want to know our secret," Han said, scanning the message. "What will you tell them?" Yun asked. Han thought about everything they had experienced: the inheritance, the cultural clashes, the conspiracy, the breakthroughs, and finally, the emergence of their new way of working together. "I'll tell them that the future doesn't belong to humans or Quilaxians," he said finally. "It belongs to those willing to see beyond their own perspectives." As their shuttle docked at the habitat that had once been Tahoe's exclusive domain and was now home to an expanding team of humans and Quilaxians working together, Han realized that his greatest inheritance hadn't been wealth or status. It had been the opportunity to bridge 2 worlds that had been separated by more than just the cold expanses of space. The new paradigm they had created was just beginning, and its potential seemed as vast as the galaxy itself.